Hello everyone and welcome back to our wellbeing webinars. Today's webinar is sleeping better, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. And thank you for joining us. And for those of you that were meant to be joining us for yesterday's webinar, we do apologise that we were unfortunately unable to hold the webinar due to problems with Microsoft Teams, but we have planned another webinar, so that will be on Tuesday the 11th of May. But thank you for joining us today, for those of you that registered following on from that yesterday. So my name is Emily Gardner. For those of you that have not met me before, I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist working for the NHS in London. And I've been trained to deliver specialised therapy for adults with anxiety and depression. Before we get started, it will be helpful for you to know how the Q&A function works, as we're going to be using this throughout the webinar today. So the first thing I'd like you to do is have a look on the right-hand side of your screen and click on the box with the question mark, and that should open up the chat box for the live Q&A. And then it will give you the option to enter your name or to click on the small box by the blue arrow. And we would encourage you to do this to remain anonymous throughout today's webinar. That way we can keep your details confidential. If you do wish to add your name, please just use your first name. And then you can enter your question and click on the arrow to send. So if I ask a question, I'd like you to respond here during the webinar. If I ask you to respond to a poll, we will copy and paste the poll options into the chat, and you can select like or the thumbs up button to select which option is relevant to you. And if you have a question for us, then please use this function here, and we will try and answer your questions. And throughout the webinar, if any question comes to mind that you'd like to ask me, I will be doing a bit of a Q&A at the end of the webinar today. So save any of those questions you have and I'll go through them at the end. And as we go through the webinar, there will be a slight delay with publishing the webinar, your questions and comments, as they need to be approved by a moderator. So it may take a few moments for your comment or question to appear. And if you wish to keep your question private for the moderators only, if you add private at the beginning of your comment or question, then that conversation will stay between you and the moderators. We may not be able to answer all of your questions today because of time, but we'll try and answer as many as possible. So let's try it out now. Tell us a bit about you. So if you go over to the Q&A now, open it up and select one of these options and tell us who you are here for. Some of you may be here for yourself, whereas some of you may be here to learn more about how to support a family member or a friend who might be struggling, or maybe you're here in a professional role or another reason. So please do share that with us, and I'll come back to your responses in a few moments. So we decided to develop this series of webinars as we're very well aware of the challenging time that we're all going through. And we wanted to develop a series of webinars to help you to cope with the impact caused by the coronavirus. And we've changed the theme of these webinars each week, focusing on all the different ways that COVID-19 might be impacting on your mental health. And in each of the webinars, the first step is understanding why you feel the way you feel or why there's been a particular change. And then we share some strategies and techniques to hopefully improve the way that you feel. So let's see who you are here for today. So I'm going to come across to the chat function now and have a look at your responses. Okay, so I can see that most of you are here for yourself. Most of you have selected A. So welcome, and I really hope today you find something useful that you can put into practice for your own, well, I guess, sleep difficulties. Okay, another question for you. What do you hope to get out of this webinar? So you may have already had this in mind before you signed up, but just share with us now over in the Q&A what you are hoping to get from the webinar today. So this series of webinars is designed to provide you with a toolkit of evidence-based resources, ideas and tools with the idea that this should help you over the next few days, weeks and months. And the content of all of these webinars are based on cognitive behavioural therapy, which is a very effective treatment for anxiety as well as depression. And the focus of CBT is on making changes to our thoughts and our behaviour to improve the way that we feel. And in particular for today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on sleep. So we're going to start with understanding sleep, insomnia, and looking at some sleep statistics and understanding why we sleep. And then once we know a bit about that, we will then introduce several techniques which can be used to help you to overcome some of the sleep difficulties that you have been experiencing. So by the end of this webinar, you should feel equipped to put some changes in place that will hopefully improve your sleep. So let's have a look at your responses and see what you hope to get from the webinar today. Tips for better sleep for myself and to pass on to others. Lovely. So, you know, many of us will have been experiencing sleep difficulties in the last year, but we will also know other people struggling. So a great reason to be here. Strategies, different thought patterns to try out, maybe new ideas to aid better sleep. How to stop waking in the middle of the night, and if I do, then stop my brain racing so I can get back to sleep through the night, techniques for helping me to get a better night's sleep, tools, hints with sleeping better. Lovely. All of these things we're going to cover, some suggestions of how to deal with better sleep. Vicious circle as lack of sleep makes you feel worse with stress. Yeah, absolutely. Sleep better. What to do if you wake a lot, lay awake and get up too early in the morning. Okay, yep, so some of the strategies we talk through should help with all of these things. Understand better what I can do to help my sleep and midnight insomnia, tips to get a good night's sleep. Lovely. So yeah, absolutely. Today we will be covering most of these things and you will go away with some of these tips and techniques to improve your sleep. And we've got quite a step-by-step process that you can follow to help you maximize your sleep, what we call sleep efficiency. Okay. So some of you may be here because you have long-standing sleep difficulties, whereas some of you may have previously slept quite well, but you're now finding it harder to get to sleep, or maybe you're waking early, or perhaps you've been having more unusual dreams since COVID started. Reports have found that some people are sleeping longer but feel less rested, whereas some people are just generally struggling with sleep more at the moment. And it is quite understandable because the changes that we have been through in the last year naturally will increase our stress and anxiety levels, which in turn impact our ability to sleep well. And researchers have said that sleep problems are more common in people facing financial hardship, and many people over the last year will be experiencing more financial problems as well. So kind of a lot of things going on that may be impacting your sleep, and these reasons are understandable. And so it is quite normal that your sleep may well have been impacted in the last year, as it's been a really stressful and difficult time for many of us. And some of you might be struggling right now and feel that you have nowhere to turn. And we really hope this webinar will be useful for you, but we also wanted you to know where you can turn if you feel like you need immediate support. So if you're having thoughts of suicide or of harming yourself in any way, then we really encourage you to tell someone. Don't struggle by yourself. So the Samaritans are here to listen to you at any time of day or night, and you can talk to them about anything. And the number to call them for free is 116 123. And we will share more information about getting further support at the end of the webinar. So if you do want to know more, then we will share that at the end. And you can find this number and this information at the very first published announcement if you scroll right up to the Q&A chat. So if at any point you need this number, please scroll up to the top. So here we have a common sleep cycle, and this is a cycle that many of you may have been experiencing in the last few months. So you may have found yourself lying in bed trying to sleep, and sleep just fails to come. And going through your mind might be a number of thoughts, but some of the common thoughts that you may have experienced: I'm never going to get to sleep, I'm bound to have a terrible day tomorrow, I'll be awake all night, I won't be able to focus at work tomorrow. So lots of kind of negative thoughts about not being able to sleep and the consequences of that. That's quite common. And then naturally that will impact on our physical symptoms. So we're going to feel quite tired, restless, more fatigue, lacking in energy, exhausted, aches and pains. But as well as that, we may also have some mental impairments such as loss of attention and memory and difficulties concentrating. And so naturally, when we feel this way physically, there'll be a number of changes to our behaviours. So because we're so tired, we may try to catch up with sleep during the day. So we have a nap, and we may be snappy and irritable with others. We may just end up laying awake in bed at night thinking about things. We might be checking or avoiding the clock. We might drink more alcohol or stimulants to give us energy, and we may well reduce our activities the following day because we're tired. And all of these thoughts, physical symptoms and behaviours will have a knock-on effect onto our emotions. So we're going to feel more irritable, frustrated. We're going to start to dread sleep, dread night times. We're going to feel down, fed up, stressed and worried. And this can become a bit of a vicious cycle in that when we start to dread sleep, we start to predict that we're going to have a bad night's sleep before we even start to go to sleep, and we're already dwelling on it, and then the cycle continues. So we're going to be looking at this cycle in a bit more detail today and how we can break this cycle. So how much sleep do you get each night? So everyone is different, everyone has different sleep needs, but I just want you to think about right now, on average, how many hours a night do you think you're getting? So we're going to put these options in the poll, as a poll in the Q&A. So if you go to the Q&A now, you can select A, less than 5 hours, B, 5 to 6 hours, C, 6 to 7 hours, D, 7 to 8 hours, or E, more than 9 hours. So if you go and do that now, I'll come back to your responses in a few moments. So insomnia, naturally, kind of generally before COVID, it's thought that it affected about 1/3 of the general population in the UK. However, reports have shown that since the coronavirus, it has increased to half the population. So half of us are experiencing sleep problems as a result of what's going on. And CBT, which stands for cognitive behavioural therapy, which is the therapy that we're basing all of these techniques on, has been found to be an effective treatment for chronic insomnia, which produces meaningful improvements in sleep diary outcomes, which basically means it's effective at improving sleep, which is great. So that's what we're going to be teaching you today. So if you are part of that half population that are struggling with sleep, then follow the techniques that we introduced today. And sorry, I've got something in my eye. And you should see improvements in your sleep. So coming back to how many hours of sleep we get a night. So on average, we've got a report here about how much sleep people in Great Britain get on average, and 7% have less than 5 hours sleep. 33% have between 5 to 6 hours sleep. 30% have between 6 and 7 hours sleep. 22% have between 7 and 8 hours. And 7% have between 8 and 9 hours. And then finally, 1% have more than 9 hours sleep. So hopefully that gives you an insight into actually, in reality, how much sleep we have. So as you can see from these statistics, most people have between 5 to 6 hours sleep a night, closely followed by 6 to 7 hours, but the majority have between 5 to 6. So let's see if that fits with how much sleep you're getting. And so I'm going to come and look at your responses to the poll now and see which option is most, I guess, most popular. So I'll have a look now. So most of you have between 6 to 7 hours sleep, closely followed by 5 to 6 hours. So quite nearly similar to the report that we've just looked at, but actually it seems this group actually have a little bit better sleep than those in the general population. So that may well be the case, with some of you getting less than 5 hours as well. So there's definitely room for improvement for your sleep, and we're going to be looking at that today. What can we do to improve our sleep? So why do we sleep? Well, sleep is essential for humans, just like air, water and food. And we can cope without sleep for periods of time, but the longer we're awake, the stronger that urge to sleep becomes. And the function of sleep has been the topic of debate for researchers, but most agree that sleep serves a restorative purpose, both physiologically as well as psychologically. It's important for general physical health, restoring energy, repairing injuries or illness, growth, psychological well-being and mood, concentration, memory, work performance, as well as getting on well with other people as well. So it has many benefits. So how much sleep do we actually need? Well, it varies across our lifetime. So the younger we are, the more sleep we need in general. So newborn babies need between 12 and 8 hours sleep, whereas the older we get, the less sleep we need. As you can see with this picture, the older we become, that reduces. But there is variation within each age group. And we each need different amounts of sleep, depending on a number of factors. However, the 7 to 9 hour range provides a good benchmark. And obviously, most of you have said that you're getting less than that, which is why you're here, as you're hoping to improve your sleep. So research tells us that there are two types of sleep. We have REM, which is rapid eye movement sleep, and non-REM sleep. So if we look at this diagram here, we have stage 1, which is light sleep, and this is between being awake and falling asleep. Stage 2 is the onset of sleep, when we begin to become disengaged from our surroundings, our body temperature drops, our breathing and heart rate become regular. Then we move to stages 3 and 4, where these stages are the deeper, more restorative sleep known as delta sleep. Stage 3 is a transition into that really deep sleep. But during both of these stages, our blood pressure drops, breathing becomes slower, our muscles are relaxed and receiving more blood supply, our tissues grow and repair, hormones are released, especially the growth hormone, which is why teenagers need a lot more sleep. And it is also thought that delta sleep is the most restorative for the body and physical energy, while REM sleep, which is our final stage, is most important for restoring mental functions such as memory and concentration. People vary in terms of how much sleep they actually need. While the average sleep duration for adults is 6 to 8 hours a night, some people function well on a little less sleep and others with a bit more. But whatever your individual sleep needs, lack of sleep can have effects, and these common effects are poor attention, concentration and memory, irritability and other mood disturbances, impaired judgment and impaired reaction times, and then poor physical coordination, which can be dangerous for driving. And the seriousness of these effects depends on how bad the sleep deprivation is. So obviously less sleep versus no sleep, or one night's sleep compared to chronic sleep problems. So there is a difference. You know, we can function well on one night's bad sleep, whereas if we do have chronic problems, these symptoms can get worse. So if you do have ongoing problems with sleep, then it is really important to seek help with it. So what are the steps to overcoming insomnia, and what can you do today to start thinking about improving your sleep? So we have 3 steps to improve and overcome insomnia. And the idea is that you work your way up the steps, trying step 1 before moving to step 2 or 3. And use all the advice in these steps and try not to pick and choose for it to be as effective as possible. So step 1 is sleep hygiene and relaxation. Step 2 is sleep retraining. And step 3 is sleep restriction. So we're going to start talking about sleep hygiene. And some of these techniques and tips you may have heard before or tried. So sleep hygiene is the term used to describe good sleep habits. And there has been considerable research into developing this set of guidelines to enhance good sleeping. So the idea is that there is kind of a guideline, there are rules to good sleep. And so what we can do is make a number of changes in these different areas which should improve our sleep. So this is our first step when we are having sleep difficulties, to make sure we do all of these things and think about all of these things. So one of the first changes we can make is in our environment. So it's very important that your bed and bedroom are quiet and comfortable for sleeping. Ideally a cooler room with enough blankets to stay warm. So 18 degrees is the optimum temperature for sleeping. And also to make sure that you have curtains or an eye mask to block out early morning light, and earplugs if there is noise outside of your room. But we also need to prepare our body for sleep. So it is best to avoid consuming any caffeine, whether that's coffee, tea, Coca-Cola, chocolate, some medications, or nicotine for at least 4 to 6 hours before going to bed, because these substances act as stimulants and interfere with the ability to actually fall asleep. It's also best to avoid drinking alcohol for at least 4 to 6 hours before going to bed. And many people believe that alcohol is relaxing and helps them to get to sleep, which is true, because it does help you get to sleep at first, but it actually interrupts the quality of your sleep, and you're more likely to wake up if you have drunk alcohol within those 4 to 6 hours before going to bed. So it may be that you do manage to fall asleep, but you're waking up throughout the night. A healthy, balanced diet will help you to sleep well, but timing is very important. So some people find that a very empty stomach at bedtime can be quite distracting. So a light snack before going to bed can be helpful, but a heavy meal soon before bed can also interrupt sleep. Some people recommend a warm glass of milk because it contains tryptophan, which is a natural sleep inducer. Also, regular exercise is a really good idea to help with sleep, but try not to do strenuous exercise in the 4 hours before bedtime. Morning walks are a great way to start the day feeling refreshed. But we also need to prepare our mind for sleep. It can be helpful to develop your own rituals of things to do before going to bed to remind your body that it's time to sleep. Some people find it useful to do relaxing stretches or breathing exercises for 15 minutes before bed each night, or to sit calmly with a cup of caffeine-free tea. A pre-bedtime routine can be helpful to prepare our minds for sleep. And also kind of remembering that all of these factors are the environment, our body, our mind. Some of the things affecting these things may have been impacted by COVID. So you may have naturally reduced the amount you exercise as a result, or your bedroom may well be associated with work if you've had to work from your bedroom. And this may have disrupted your normal sleep associations. So it may be that some of these things have been out of your control, but hopefully now you can start to think about maybe making some changes in these areas to improve your sleep. So I mentioned it can be helpful to start by preparing the mind for sleep, by putting in place a pre-bedtime routine. And ideally, this should start around 60 to 90 minutes before you go to bed. And this period should help you start to unwind. So much like you would with a newborn baby, to help them to learn to associate this particular routine with sleep, you can use this routine to put the day to rest and signal to your body and mind that it's nearly time for sleep. Because if you do the same thing every day, you're teaching your body that this is what you do before you go to bed. So things such as putting away your laptop or work things, turning off email notifications, then engaging with relaxation activities to ready your mind for sleep. And it is important to kind of recognise that for some people, using an electronic device such as a laptop can make it hard to fall asleep because of the particular light coming from these screens is actually activating the brain. So if you do have trouble with sleep, then it may be important for you to avoid using your phone or your laptop or iPad before you go to bed or in the middle of the night. So here's an example of an evening wind down routine, and it should include things like slowing down your work or the activity that you're doing, and then stopping it, and then having wind down activities before those immediate pre-bedtime activities such as locking up, washing and getting ready for bed. And putting the day to rest can be really helpful. So setting aside 20 minutes in the early evening every night where you can reflect on the day, make a to-do list tomorrow. And this can be really helpful because you're thinking of all the things that you've achieved and done and planning for the next day. But what you're doing is you're closing the book on the day, so that when you are in bed, you can remind yourself that you've already dealt with these concerns. So if anything comes up or any new worries come up, you just write them down, add them to your to-do list, and you can deal with them tomorrow. But it's also could also be helpful to think of things that you're looking forward to as well, rather than just focusing on worries and negative things. And also relaxation activities should be included in your wind down routine as well. And finally, stop trying to sleep. So how do good sleepers do it? Well, the key thing is that good sleepers, or the best sleepers, don't even think about sleep. As soon as you start giving your attention to your sleeplessness, the more this will take over your thinking and the harder it will be to actually fall asleep. So one solution is to have a more accepting approach to being awake. So in other words, it's not the being awake that's the problem, it's our emotional reaction to being awake, or our emotional frustration at being awake. So if you can, try to develop a more relaxed frame of mind about your sleep. And relaxation exercises and present mind focus can be really helpful with this. And the more you practice, the more helpful they will be. If you don't know much about present mind focus or relaxation, next week's webinars are going to be mindfulness based. So you might get some techniques from our mindfulness session that could help you with this. So once you've had a go at the sleep hygiene, and put all these tips into place. And if it's still not working, we can then move on to step 2. So after a period of time of struggling with sleep, as I mentioned at the beginning, bedtime can often become something that we can start to dread. And we can find ourselves thinking about what will happen when we get into bed. So throughout the day, we might start thinking about it. And we can become more and more agitated about whether we will get a decent night's sleep as the evening progresses. So if this is something that you've noticed and the sleep hygiene techniques haven't really helped, it may be necessary for us to look at retraining our brains back into a healthy sleep-wake cycle. So how does that work? How do we retrain our sleep? Well, good sleepers have a strong positive association between going to bed and successful sleep. The best sleepers don't even think about sleep and frequently look forward to getting into bed. When we are experiencing sleeping difficulties, we have less of a positive association between our bed and sleep. And in fact, we can often begin to develop quite a strong negative association between our bed and sleeplessness, which can lead to anxiety and frustration. And these associations may have changed due to homeworking or homeschooling. So initially, you may have had really good sleep associations in the past, but that may have changed throughout this last year. The good news is that we can retrain our minds to break down these negative associations and develop more positive associations, which will bring us back into a good sleep-wake pattern. So when we are experiencing sleeping difficulties, we need to be stricter with what we're doing whilst we're in bed in order to readdress any negative associations that we have built up. So for example, when a good sleeper reads in bed, they may find themselves fighting to stay awake after only a few pages. However, when a poor sleeper reads in bed, they may be doing this as a way of trying to fall asleep or as a way of distracting themselves from the frustration of sleeplessness. Therefore, reading becomes associated with stress and anxiety. So the first tip is to ban all activities, apart from sexual activity, from the bedroom. And this includes watching television, reading, eating, talking on the phone, or working. And the idea behind this is that over time, this will help us to readdress the bed-sleep connection. And it's especially important for very mentally stimulating activities such as watching television, working, playing games, that kind of thing. So this does include not using your bed and ideally your bedroom for working. And this may well be hard for some of you, as you may not have an alternative place to work privately. And if that is the case, try and create a very clear distinction between working and your evening. Give yourself plenty of time before you go to bed, before you stop working. Put away your laptop and work things so that they're not in sight. Turn off your email notifications, your phone, etc. So that's really key, is that if you have no choice but to work in your bedroom, then it's making sure you have clear boundaries of working ends and have that wind down time where you're not engaging in any work. So this is the first thing to do, is to not do anything in your bed or bedroom except sleep. And then step 2 is to aim to fall asleep within 15 minutes of going to bed. Most good sleepers will naturally fall asleep within 15 minutes of getting in their bed, because lying in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep, strengthens the association between being in bed and wakefulness and frustration. So in order to break this association and strengthen a positive, good well, a positive bed sleep connection. If after 15 minutes you haven't fallen asleep, then you need to get up and go into a different room and do something different until you feel sleepy again. And then when you feel drowsy, you can get back into bed and give yourself another 15-minute opportunity to fall asleep. And then you repeat this as often as necessary. And it is important what you do in that time. So when you get out of bed because you haven't slept, it's important not to engage in an activity that's very mentally stimulating. So choosing a magazine over a book, some light chores rather than working, and ideally not surfing the internet. But it might be important to learn the difference between feeling sleepy and feeling tired, because tiredness doesn't actually mean that sleep is inevitable. Sleepiness is signals from our body that it is time to go to sleep. And signals that we're sleepy rather than tired are itchy eyes, aching muscles, that involuntary tendency to nod off, lacking in energy, yawning. And so this is ideally the way that you should feel when you get into bed. So if you're not feeling sleepy, you need to wait until you are before you get into bed. And you don't just go to bed because it's bedtime or because of wishful thinking or desperation to sleep. Tiredness is something we feel within our bodies, which means that we need to rest, whereas sleepiness is a signal from our brain that it's ready to switch off, ready for sleep. And the final rule of sleep retraining is to avoid napping during the day completely. So you need to save up all of your sleep for nighttime. So this means no napping during the day or evening. And this can be difficult, especially if you are having sleep disturbances. However, napping can drastically reduce our need for sleep at night. And not napping helps to build a drive for sleep at night. So whilst this is a difficult step, it's really important that we do not nap during the day or evening. Step 3, sleep restriction. So sleep restriction therapy works to decrease the variability in the timing of sleep while increasing the depth of sleep. And the goal is to shorten the amount of time we spend in bed initially in order to consolidate our sleep. The good news is this technique works, okay? And research has shown that sleep restriction is the most effective treatment available for sleep difficulties and insomnia. However, the bad news is it takes several weeks of altering your sleep schedule in order to see any results. And initially, you may well feel sleepier and experience disrupted sleep. However, if you stick with it, your insomnia will improve. And this is why this is the third step, because if step 1 or step 2 are effective, you don't need to go to these lengths to improve your sleep. So start with step 1, then step 2, and then if they haven't worked, then we go to this kind of more difficult strategy, but it is very effective. So what does it involve? So sleep restriction training involves putting into place a sleep window, which is a very specific amount of total time in bed that initially matches your average sleep time from a 1 to 2 week sleep diary. So for some people, you may have had a set sleep window before this last year happened, and that may have changed as a result of being furloughed, or perhaps your working patterns have changed, and so your pre-existing set sleep times have changed. So naturally that's impacted your sleep window or your biological clock, which may well be why you're having sleep problems at the moment. So stage 1 is to determine your allowed time in bed. And now this is different for everyone, which is why we keep a sleep diary for at least 1 week. And at the end of the week, you add up the total amount of hours and divide this by the number of days that you've recorded. And this will give you your current average amount of sleep per night. This is your sleep window. However, we don't want this to go below 5 hours. So if your total sleep time is less than 5 hours, then you would use your 5 hours as your time in bed. So this is an example sleep restriction diary. So as you can see here, we've kept a record Monday to Sunday, and we've got the hours kept here. So we've got the amount of hours asleep versus the hours in bed. Both of these are important, but for working out your sleep window, this is the most important bit here. So for this example, it's 5.9. So once you have your sleep window, you can move to stage 2, where you set a wake-up time. So the key here is to wake up at the same time every morning, no matter how much sleep you got the night before. So even if your sleep was really bad, you still get up at that set sleep time. So in this example, it's 7 AM. And you anchor your morning wake-up time around that set sleep time. And then stage 3 is to work out your threshold bedtime. So you subtract your average sleep time, which is 6 hours in this example, from your morning rising time, which is 7 AM. And this will give you your threshold bedtime. So if you want to wake up at 7 AM every day, you work back and you take away your average sleep time, so 6 hours from that, which will give you a threshold bedtime of 1 AM. And then once you have your threshold bedtime, this is the earliest point at which you can go to bed. And we call this a threshold bedtime rather than bedtime because you don't necessarily need to go to bed at this point. The idea is that this is the earliest you should go to bed, because you should actually only go to bed when you're feeling sleepy, not tired, sleepy. So I've talked you through the signals of sleepiness. So it's at this point then that you go to bed. And you do this every night. You stick to this schedule as closely as possible for at least 2 weeks. And if after the 2 weeks, if you're sleeping relatively well for most nights and you feel good during the day, then you can continue to keep this schedule. However, if you're feeling tired during the day, you may want to look at increasing your sleep window. So how do I know when it's time to increase my sleep window? So once you are sleeping 90% of the time that you're in bed for at least a week, you can then increase your time in bed by 15 minutes, either by going to bed 15 minutes earlier. So in the case of the example, it would be 12:45, or by staying in bed 15 minutes later. So in the example, it'd be 7:15. And you can use a sleep efficiency calculation to help you work this out. So once you are 90% sleep efficient, which means that 90% of the time you're in bed, you are sleeping. So the calculation is you work out your total hours of sleep divided by the total hours you spent in bed times by 100, and that will give you your sleep efficiency. So for the example we have here, and this is from the sleep diary that we had at the beginning, so 5.9 hours divided by the amount of time you actually spent in bed, which is 7.14, times by 100 gives you an 82.63% sleep efficiency. So in this example, that's under 90%. So you're not being sleep efficient at this stage. So you need to continue to stick to the schedule until you become 90% sleep efficient. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. So how do we use the steps together? So the key is to stay up until your threshold bedtime. And when you do, you only lie in bed when you feel sleepy. remembering to not do anything in your bed except for sleep. If you can't get to sleep quickly, so within those 15 minutes, then get up to prevent creating a negative sleep association. And then if you still cannot fall asleep, repeat it. Again, if you still cannot fall asleep, then get up and then come to bed a bit later. If you wake up in the night, then yes, if you're not falling back to sleep within 15 minutes, then it's important to get up and get out and then come back when you're feeling sleepy. And then number 8 is to get up in the morning at your agreed set rising time, regardless of how well you have slept. And then number 9, do not nap during the day or evening, and you stay up all night, right up until your threshold bedtime. And you need to do this for at least 7 days, 7 nights a week. So, you know, this means sticking to it at the weekends as well as during the week, regardless of what you're doing. And I know that can be hard, but that's why this step is kind of more challenging, because it does take more commitment. But as I said, it is very effective. So it's really important to work your way up the steps. Try step 1 before moving to step 2 or 3. And as I said, use all of the advice before, try not to pick and choose. So if you've tried some of the sleep hygiene techniques, go back to them, revisit them, and try and put all of them in place and make sure you're doing all of those things that we talked about at the beginning. Remember that it is going to be tough to combat your insomnia. And we are recommending ways for you to break old habits which may have been formed and reinforced for a really long time. While it will be tough to stick to these techniques, they will be beneficial, but you may need to be tolerant and kind to yourself when you might feel like you're failing. And recognise that finding ways to stay motivated and positive about the effort that you're putting in will be very important in helping you to make those lasting improvements. But it's also important to recognise that setbacks are perfectly normal and they're to be expected in anyone's road to change. And it's important not to be discouraged and learn from that setback and keep focused on moving forward. And it's important to remember that everyone experiences a bad night's sleep from time to time, even good sleepers. And this means that even once you're back to sleeping well, you will still have bad night's sleep from time to time. So you're not back at square one if you have a bad night, because everyone has bad sleep from time to time, and that's perfectly normal. So some of you may be working in shifts, and I wanted to kind of mention that because obviously that can impact how we use these techniques. A non-traditional work schedule can be very disruptive to a person's circadian rhythm, or what we call a biological clock. The biological clock and our circadian rhythm regulates wakefulness and sleepiness at relatively set times throughout a 24-hour day. And this can be very frustrating when it's been thrown off, and this can happen when we're working in shifts. So if we're not sleeping at the regular times, we can notice a number of symptoms, so sleepiness, not being as alert, change in body temperature, change in hormone levels, as well as hunger. So we have some tips for shift workers who may be wanting to improve their sleep. So firstly, try to keep a regular sleep schedule, including your days off. If possible, take 48 hours off after a series of shifts. Also, it can be helpful to wear sunglasses when leaving work to minimise that sun exposure, and it can also prevent that daytime clock from activating. So wear sunglasses when you leave work, so even if it's daytime, so that you don't get activated before you go to bed. This advice is different, so we encourage you to take naps where possible, but again, limiting caffeine at least 4 hours before you're going to bed. Maintain a healthy diet rich in fruits and vegetables. It is important to use heavy shades for sleep to create a really dark environment so you're not disturbed by the sun. And also to take a 30 to 60-minute nap right before your shift. And remembering to ask family members and other people you live with to reduce noise by using headphones or whilst they're watching television or listening to music, and ideally avoid doing any household chores until you're awake. And if you can, avoid a long commute, as this can cut into your sleeping hours and might cause further drowsiness. It can be helpful to keep nightly rituals before going to bed, even if it's in the daytime. Do the same thing that you would do before going to bed of a night time. Wear earplugs or use white noise to drown out any sound while you're sleeping. And if you can, purchase a light box for light therapy to expose your eyes to extremely bright light before you work. So if you're waking up in the night, you have that way of waking you up for your day. So what are the main take-home messages from today's webinar? So we need between 6 and 9 hours sleep, but everyone is different. And we can make changes to our environment and body to maximise our sleep. Start a pre-bedtime routine about 60 to 90 minutes before bed. If sleep doesn't come within 15 minutes, then get out of bed and go to another room. Avoid napping, that's a golden rule. And you can improve your sleep efficiency by restricting the amount of time you spend in bed to that specific sleep window. So, what I'd like you to do now is to choose an idea from today's webinar that you're going to action over this next week. So A, pre-bedtime routine. B, remembering that bed is for sleep only. C, you're going to try that 15-minute rule where you will, if you're not asleep within 15 minutes, you're going to get up and get out of bed. D, you're going to stop napping. E, you're going to work out your own sleep window and kind of work out your schedule. So select one of these options now in the Q&A by liking the one that you're going to try over the next week. And I'll come to your responses in a few moments. Also, if you do have any questions about anything we've talked about today, if you add that to the Q&A now, I will spend a few moments at the end of the webinar just going through any of your questions. So just a note about some of the things that are in the slide deck, which will be available on the Thrive London website, as well as a recording of today's webinar. So we have here a blank copy of that 5 areas model that I talked about at the beginning of the webinar, with some very helpful questions for you to work out your own vicious cycles. And then we have a blank sleep diary for you to work out your own sleep restriction, as well as an example just to help you kind of work it out. So it just gives you some examples of how to calculate your own sleep window and then how to work out your threshold bedtime, etc. And then finally, just the dates of our future webinars. So we do have 2 more webinars next week on mindfulness, and we're going to repeat this sleep webinar the following week as we had to postpone yesterday's webinar due to Microsoft Teams not working. So if you would like to register for any of these webinars or let some of your friends or family members know about these webinars, then you can use this link, which we're going to copy and paste into the Q&A chat as well. If you feel like you need further support and you would like to access your local IAPT service, these are free national services which offer treatment for anxiety, depression, as well as sleep problems. And you can contact your local, you can self-refer. And in order to find your local IAPT service, you can use this link and type in your postcode and it will give you the details of your local IAPT service. And if you feel like you need urgent support, then we do recommend you speak to your GP if you can. However, if you can't wait to see a doctor, then we do encourage you to reach out to some of these other organisations, such as the Samaritans. Call them for free on 116 123, or Shout, who offer confidential 24/7 crisis text support. So you can text Shout to 85258. If you're not sure what help you need, then you can go to NHS Urgent Support Guidance. This link here will give you some guidance on what kind of support you might need. There are some other really useful resources and links in the slide deck. Specifically for sleep, we have a link here to Sleepio, which is an online sleep improvement program, which is really useful. So if you feel like that would be beneficial, check it out. And finally, we really do value your feedback and would love to hear your thoughts about the webinar today. We're going to copy and paste a link to a survey into the Q&A. So if you click on the link, it will take you to a survey where you can answer some questions about how you found today's webinar, which will be really useful for us to develop future webinars. That is the end of our webinar. Really hope it's been helpful, and I really hope you've got some ideas about how you can start to improve your sleep using the steps. So we'll now come to the Q&A and see if any of you have any questions that you would like to ask. So if you haven't already done so, if you could add them to the Q&A now, and I'll have a look at them and I'll answer as many as we have time for. So I'm just scrolling down to the bottom. Okay, I can see one. Difficulty to really follow the steps if you have caring responsibility for others. Any tips for that situation? I suppose it really depends on how the caring responsibilities impact your sleep. I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is when you have children. That's a good example of how your sleep can be disrupted. So it's an external factor impacting your sleep. So obviously the tips are still relevant in that, you know, obviously you're being woken by something external, but maybe that 15-minute rule of when you do get back into bed, if you're not asleep within 15 minutes, if you've been woken up in the night, I mean, so if you're not asleep within 15 minutes, then get up, rather than creating a negative sleep association. So that's one way of doing it if your sleep is being disturbed regularly by someone you care for. I guess it's tricky to answer that one without knowing fully how your sleep is, how caring is preventing you from sticking to the sleep guidelines. So if you have time to add any more information, that'd be really helpful. Let's have a look. Let's see if there's any more. Yes, so you mentioned no napping, but then gave this as a tip for shift workers. So the tips for shift workers are separate. So if you're not a shift worker, don't follow the napping rule. It's if you're a shift worker that napping may be a way of helping you to function and manage the sleepiness and the drowsiness that naturally will come from working shifts. So yeah, there is a contradiction, but that's because it's quite a different scenario. So if you're not a shift worker, no napping rule applies. If you're a shift worker, then napping may well help manage the impact of your circadian rhythm being thrown off. Also, if you're a good sleeper, then napping is okay. There's nothing wrong with a nap if you're generally a good sleeper. I know mothers of newborns are told to sleep when their child is napping, and that is because, you know, you're not getting as much sleep at night, and so napping can be a way to gain that sleep back. And also the sleep disruption is being caused by an external factor rather than your own sleep associations or sleep pattern being out of whack. So napping can be useful for people who don't have those negative sleep associations, if that makes sense. I've read the best quality sleep is between the hours of 10 till 2. Is there any truth to that? I have heard that too. I don't know. Basically, I don't know is my answer to that one. I've heard it too, but I don't know if that's based on any research. But I can look into it, and I can share that with people at the next sleep webinar, which will be on the 11th of May. But yeah, I'm happy to look into that because I don't know the answer to that question. I have found that medication has been really helpful for me to relax and get to sleep in the evening. Thank you. I'm glad that medication's been helpful for you. How do you reduce nighttime wakening? So by doing the sleep retraining. So the idea is to teach your body to consolidate your sleep within a specific time period, rather than being in bed for 8 hours, but you're actually only asleep for 6. It's saying actually you only go to bed for 6 hours, which means your sleep will hopefully consolidate and prevent waking up time. So after a while of doing, so initially obviously you'll still wake up because that's maybe what your body's used to. But the idea is that if you do this consistently, your sleep will consolidate and you won't wake up as much, unless there are things in your environment which are waking you and you're not realizing it. So that's why we start with the sleep hygiene, to make sure that all of those things are in place already. So making sure it's dark, making sure there's no noise, etc. And so you've got to make sure those things are in place first, because if it might just be a simple fix, temperature, etc. So start with the sleep hygiene to reduce anything that might be waking you, and then move on to the other steps if necessary. Anyone find a full moon makes a difference? I've heard that as well, but again, I don't know if it's based on any research. What rules if your partner doesn't stick to bedtime rules? This is really hard because obviously you can't control your partner or other people in the house. That is a challenge. I guess if you're really struggling with sleep, it's just about having that conversation and saying, look, this is really important that I do this, and talking about how you can manage that. So just having that frank conversation with them about how you both manage that difference if they're not going to go to bed when you go to bed, or stick to these rules when you are going to bed, because naturally them being noisy when they go to bed will impact your sleep. So it's just, I guess, start with that conversation. Maybe invite them to attend a sleep webinar so that they can learn a bit more about what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do. But yeah, I guess just have that conversation with them, and explain why it's important for you and why you're trying to put these techniques into place. Hopefully my answers have helped some of your questions, but as I said, start from step 1, get all those sleep hygiene tips in place, then move to step 2, and then move to step 3, which is that sleep restriction, and hopefully you'll see some improvements in your sleep. And if you do need some tips on relaxation and present mind focus and mindfulness, then do attend our webinar next week, which will hopefully give you some ideas of how you can relax and wind down before bedtime, which should help as well. So for those of you that are going to join us next week, I'll see you then. Have a good week.